Welcome to the Road to Accountable AI. I'm Kevin Werbach, Professor of Legal Studies and Business Ethics at the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania. For decades, I've studied emerging technologies from broadband to blockchain. Today, artificial intelligence promises to transform our world. But AI won't reach its potential without accountability, mechanisms to ensure it's deployed in responsible, safe, and trustworthy ways. On this podcast, I speak with the experts leading the charge for accountable AI. There is a great deal of discussion nowadays about new legal requirements and regulations for AI. But that's not the only role for government in this area, and it may not be the most important one. Elham Tabassi is Associate Director for Emerging Technologies at NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology in the U.S. Commerce Department, and Chief Technologist of the new U.S. AI Safety Institute. She was named by Time magazine as one of the 100 most influential people in AI, largely because of her role in the NIST AI Risk Management Framework, or RMF. In our conversation, we talk about the development process for the RMF, the science of measurement, the challenges of operationalizing legal and governance requirements for AI, and the path towards standards for trustworthy AI. Elham Tabassi, welcome. Glad to have you on the podcast.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
First, why don't you tell us what NIST is, because it's an important agency, but one that maybe people are not necessarily familiar with, even if they know something about the U.S. government and policy.
Oh, yeah, happy to. And that's a great starting point. So NIST, our National Institute of Standards and Technology, is a non-regulatory agency. We are under the Department of Commerce. And NIST was established back in 1902 with a unique mission to advance U.S. innovation and industrial competitiveness. Here at NIST, we have a very broad portfolio of research, from building the most accurate atomic clock to cybersecurity to artificial intelligence, advanced communications, but most importantly, a long tradition of cultivating trust in technology. And we do that by advancing measurement science and standards that makes technology more reliable, secure, private, fair, or in other words, more trustworthy. And that's exactly what we have been doing in the space of AI.
Absolutely. And so you were one of the architects of the NIST AI Risk Management Framework, which came out in January of 2023. Other than the general goal of trusted technology that you just described, where did that project come from? How did that come about?
Yeah. So AI RMF, that was released a little over a year ago. It was directed by congressional mandate. It is a voluntary framework for managing the risk of AI in a flexible, structured, and measurable way. The whole point is that we harness the power of AI for good, and AI can serve all people in a beneficial, fair, and equitable manner. These three attributes that I talked about, flexible, structured, and measurable, we want it to be flexible to be able to keep up the pace with this rapid change of the technology, but also so that the different organizations with different resources be able to implement that. We didn't want to be a heavy thing that only the big organizations that have AI governance or, a lot of people doing that be able to operationalize it. Structured in the terms that when we start working on AI RMF, the concept of the trustworthiness, the question of what constitutes trust were not quite answered. When there has been a lot of really high-level value-based documents that talk about these things, none of them try to get those principles into sort of the building blocks that the developers and deployer of the technology can use that. So working with the community, we try to come up with unpacking the concept of the trustworthiness. We come up with the components of the AI system that's trustworthy, which those characteristics are valid and reliable, safe, secure and resilient, privacy enhanced, explainable and interpretable, fair, with harmful bias managed, and transparent and accountable. Bring the community on a shared understanding around each of them to get to the next attribute of the measurable, to have a good understanding of what we want to measure to be able to measure them. So the importance of being able to define trustworthiness into technical and socio-technical terms that developers of the technology, deployers of the technologies, users of the technology can understand, and then build the community together to come up with a scientific underpinning for how to measure those. Because if you're really serious in the business of improving things, first we have to be able to measure them. We can't improve things that we cannot measure.
So I want to get back to that question about measurement because it is really critical. But first, let me just ask you, that's a big challenge talking about trustworthiness around AI and all those principles you described. They make sense, but how did you and the team get your arms around that? How to decide what kinds of aspects to focus on and how to operationalize these broad principles?
Great question. So, how we do our work in this case and also in many other cases is to work collaboratively with public and private stakeholders. So, we basically everything that we do, we start with a formal process of request for information. That's where the government put an announcement into a federal register notice, announce to the whole public that we're doing this, and ask for comments. Then we work with the community through rounds of workshops, listening sessions to get answers to all of these questions. And in doing so, we very early on realized that we should definitely listen to a community with the expertise that are building the technology or designing this technology, those that have the expertise in computer science, mathematics, statistician, but also the community that study the impact of the technology, psychologists, sociologists, philosophers, but also the community that are going to be in charge of either top down or bottom up, try to operationalize and implement it and figure out how it basically fits into the bigger risk management of the organization. So business groups, and we also, did listening sessions with the AI users. One of our best listening sessions with when we went to community colleges, when we went to minority serving institutions and talked with the students. So by getting a lot of input from the community, input from a very diverse sets of backgrounds and expertise, we came to where we are in terms of the trustworthiness characteristics, but also the whole document.
Doesn't that broad amount of input, though, make it a challenge to come up with a consensus about what direction to go, what the principles should be?
It does. And I think that's part of the reasons that we want to do that, because it is really important to keep all of the voices included. And when you do that, and if you really go for the diversity, of course, we're going to hear inputs, both sides of the spectrum, and trying to figure out the right space. And I don't want to say middle ground because there's a lot of the things to consider. You want to be scientific, high scientific integrity and scientific validity, right? So we want to make sure that whatever we put there is technically robust and empirically validated. It is operationalizable and implementable today, but also it doesn't get expired in a very short amount of time. So we heard when we start this process from everything and everywhere, from the civil society groups that wanted everything to be absolutely public and open and audited, a lot of, vigorous tests and transparency requirements, a lot of really good reasons for that. And we also hear from the technology developers, importance of the IP and innovations and how those things has to be protected. But that's the beauty of this when you give everybody the voice and we are objective and want to convene, try to make value for every participant in the discussions to see how those consensus are being built. And the other thing is that when we get input from a very vast group of the community, NIST has the pen in writing this. So we would kind of make a decision where we have to go. Of course, we go out and explain and make sure that to the extent possible, we have the buy-in. Those buy-in are important because that's where the adoptions happens, but that is part of the process, building the consensus.
How can we measure the trustworthiness or responsibility of an AI system?
That's a very difficult, that's a technical challenge. That's a question that the community is looking at this. It's difficult at many different dimensions. So our institutions, our work, the group that I have been a part of this, and by the way, I joined this in June 7th, 1999. So in a few months, it's going to be my 25 years. And all my career here, I've been working on computer vision, machine learning type of efforts, and a lot of test and evaluation. So if some of your listeners are familiar with the face recognition test or fingerprint work that we have done, I've been part of that team doing that type of evaluation. So with a rich history and experience and understanding of how to do evaluations of the AI system poses a new sets of questions and challenges. One is, of course, what we mean by safe AI, what we mean by secure AI. But even if we can come up with some understanding of those, AI systems are not just about data, compute, and algorithm. And they are a complex interactions of the data, compute, and algorithm with the environment they're operating in, with the human that it operates at. So the solutions and the answers are not only technical and technology, but they all had to be answered through the socio-technical lens. What that means is that the evaluations that we have done before to get a systems out of their context of use, bring them to the laboratory, run the test data through them and test them. And those are important. We have to do them. They give us some baseline of the capabilities and limitations and failure modes, but they are not going to be sufficient to surface all the sorts of the problems, negative consequences that it can come out of the AI systems. We are hearing a lot about the red teaming of AI systems, so spot checking and basically trying out to see how AI systems can get into undesirable behavior. But beyond those things, we believe that another set of testing where the AI systems are being tested in their native context of use with their, the humans, individuals that are going to use it is really important. We call them field testing. We have seen examples of that in sort of, pharmaceutical, FDA is doing this. There are all these difficulties of exactly what we are testing for. And then the spectrum of the test that we are doing is not going to be enough. The laboratory testing is not going to be enough. We have to augment it with other testing. And then the other thing is that we are not going to be able to test, multi-purpose AI systems for all of the different use cases that are being used. So how to scale all of these things. So difficult problem. It is something that we have been working on since the release of the AI RMF. One of the four functions on AI RMF is the measure function. AI RMF provides, in addition to giving the structured approach to what we mean by trustworthiness, the meat of that is 72 recommendations categorized in four functions of map, measure, manage, and govern to how understand and identify AI risks, how to measure them based on those measurement results, what type of risk responses and mitigations ought to be implemented. And the govern functions give recommendations basically for the processes and procedures, all of the embeddings that's needed for the right risk management processes. So after the release of the AI RMF, we put a lot of our effort into the measure functions, which quite aligns and became the foundation work that our latest assignment as part of the EO is built on top of that. So a lot of work is happening as part of the task that we have with the EO as part of the AI Safety Institute. We are standing up and its consortium to work with the community on figuring out the evaluations. The last thing I will say in the space is that it's a tough problem, and we are not going to get the answers in the first go. So we have to be understand that it's going to be iterative. And as we do more of this research, run evaluations, write guidelines, based on those guidelines, conduct evaluations. The evaluations will tell us that what was the gaps in the guidelines. The evaluation can also say the gaps in the technology. So hopefully we are going to generate positive feedback loop. The measurement science is getting strengthened by empirical evidence, and science is going to be built around that. But also the practice and adoption of the AI is only going to get stronger because of the test results.
Can you talk about some of the directions that you and the community are going to try to come up with those benchmarks for some of those issues?
All right. So October 30th, Executive Order 14110, Safe, Secure, and Trustworthy AI, was released. It's a very comprehensive set of instructions to many of the federal government agencies on how to promote safe, secure, trustworthy AI. Section 4 on safety and security tasks several agencies, but predominantly NIST, on advancing the measurement for and evaluations for safe, secure, trustworthy AI systems. In particular, it directs NIST to develop guidelines for evaluations, red teaming, safety, cybersecurity. It asks NIST to facilitate development of consensus-based standards. It also asks NIST to provide testing environment for evaluations of the AI systems. These guidelines and infrastructures will be voluntary resources for the community to use. So right now we had our heads down drafting the documents, which we are hoping to go out for public comment. Based on the public comment, we're hoping to improve it to meet the deadlines of the EO. The EO gives us a 270 days deadline that gets us to the end of the July, but all of these could work all of these actions that the EO sets in the motion, we think that should not and cannot stop in end of July. So we're looking into the AI Safety Institute and its consortium to give a long-lasting approach to all of these efforts in the research and evaluation built there. So what we're working with the community is first develop the guidelines that we have asked through the working through the consortium with the consortium members when it's out to refine them, improve them, conduct evaluations, and based on those kind of lived experiences, improve the guidelines. Eventually, we definitely look like to have sort of standardized test environments, standardized methods and metrics and methodology for testing so that the community can use them and help with the scaling of the evaluations that needed to be done in this space.
Have you seen good examples of either private sector companies or public sector organizations taking the RMF and operationalizing it?
We have heard a lot, and we are really grateful for that. So when the AI RMF was released January 26, 2023, a lot of different companies voluntarily and entities, I should say, gave us some sort of a testimonies on how they are planning to use AI RMF. And that again goes back to building that engagement because when it comes out, everybody sees themselves in it. And then since then, we have heard from large, medium, small size businesses that are using it. Some of those has given us, we call them use cases, how they're using it internally. Some of those are posted on our website. Some of the other one has been talking to us and letting us know that, particularly for the larger organizations, how they are aligning their internal processes with AI RMF. And we're always happy to work with the smaller size businesses to help them with the operationalizations. So one of the things, for example, we did in March of 2023, we put out the Trustworthy AI Resource Center. So in addition to the release of the AI RMF, with the goal of keeping AI RMF, we call it as evergreen as possible, with a revision cycle of 3 to 5 years, we put out a playbook out that basically gives a lot of informative references and information and descriptions on exactly what to do for each of those 72 recommendations, what they can do today, what are the tools and standards that can be used today for implementations. So the playbook, we put a revision cycle of every 6 months so we can keep it up with the latest changes in the technology as tools and informations becomes available. We made sure that this is sort of interactive, filterable based on the role of the AI actor, designer, developer, the area that they want to get information out from, bias or privacy. And we're also working with the community to add more tools and supportive documents, informative references, implementations that can help with the implementation of that. But across the board, we have seen it's being used. Another interesting or welcoming happening is that at the time of the release of the AI RMF, we also released crosswalks. So AI RMF was not the first document being out, and we want to definitely make sure that we build based on the knowledge of the community and leverage. For example, the definition of AI system in the AI RMF is based on the OECD definition. So if we, based on the input of the community, we improved OECD definition, and then OECD took some of our improvement, put it back into their definition of AI systems. But we want to make sure that we are not adding confusion to the market by yet put another document out. So we put out crosswalks that says that, for example, how AI RMF relates to OECD AI recommendations. The draft of the EU AI Act passed a few weeks ago, but at that time it was a draft with some other documents that was coming out of the White House, but also with the ISO, the standards that were coming out of the ISO international standard organizations. ISO Insights is the technical tag to ISO, US technical tag to ISO. Basically pick that up. And as ISO is coming up with other standards, they develop crosswalks with AI RMF. And hopefully all of these things that's, I think, is an indications that AI RMF are being used. So that's why they need those crosswalks, but also hopefully bringing more interoperability, semantic interoperability in the short run.
You mentioned the executive order and the AI Safety Institute. That was one of the things that was created out of that process. And you're now taking over as CTO of that US AI Safety Institute. How is that different from the work that the NIST has done before, and what's on the agenda for the Institute?
Yeah, we look at both the EO and the Safety Institute as basically, that's the phrase I use, supercharging our efforts in enhancing trustworthy responsible AI. So I think in terms of the goal and vision to advance the science, practice, and policy of AI systems, increasing adoptions of the AI is the work that we are doing. And all of these things are giving us more capacity and strengthens our engagements to do better and more. Eventually, we also want to keep an eye on or help with the adoption. So as a measurement science agency, we want to make sure that the right measurement science tools, standards, guidelines are there for anybody that wants to design, develop, or use AI systems. And hopefully, by doing this, we actually help the adoption rates of AI in science, in health, climate, agriculture, of those areas that we think that that's what AI technology can bring many, many benefits.
What do you think the biggest gap is right now, or the biggest area where we haven't seen enough progress on some of the elements that are going to be necessary to promote that level of trust?
I might be biased coming from a measurement science agency, but I would say measurement and evaluations. I think everybody wants safe, secure, trustworthy AI, but we don't know how to measure them. We don't have the metrics there. We don't have the methodologies there. And there are documents, policies they like to talk about assuring that AI systems are safe. Beside in the EU AI Act, they want to see some sort of assurance or conformity assessment, but those specification hasn't been written yet. So what do we mean by safety? Policies usually stay at the abstract high level that AI should be safe or non discriminatory, but bringing it down, getting everybody on the same page that what it means and how to assure for them, I think that's one of the biggest gaps. In general, in this AI space, I will say that we know a lot less than what we should. So anything that we can know, we can do to be able to know more what to expect, how to characterize the behavior functionality of the systems. These are the good progress.
How much are those really scientific questions, though? And part of what I'm thinking about is you get to some issues like bias, where there's various different tests about algorithmic fairness, but some of them are fundamentally incompatible. And you mentioned the socio-technical aspects of the systems where there may be things that are not just about a yes or no. So how do you and others in the community work to identify what it is where we can actually get an answer through the kind of science you're talking about?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So back in March 2022, we put out a document out, special publication 1270. It has a name towards standards for understanding harmful bias in AI systems. But these are some of the foundational work that we're doing with the community that, again, as you said, there are tools for bias, but what are really measuring? Are they measuring the right thing? What should we really measure? What is bias across the life cycle of AI anyway? So that document talks about a lot of these things. And if I want to summarize the most important to me, the most important point of that document is that bias is not just about uh, disparity and demographic disparity. A lot of us, when we're talking about bias, the first thing comes to our mind is demographic disparity. The document talks about computational and statistical bias as one type of bias, but there are also other type of bias, systemic biases. If you go and do a statistically valid data collections of the community and society today, uh, that's going to be bias, and the bias is baked into the society will get into the systems because our training data will carry those biases. It also talks about another type of bias, which is cognitive biases, how the different individuals um, process informations given by AI systems or interact with AI systems, and based on that, how we react to those is different. So there's biases there too. Understanding all of these type of biases, having a wholesome understanding of now in this topic, what the bias is and how biases showed itself at the different stages of the AI life cycle become really important on other steps of the evaluation. So the science part of that again becomes to having a sort of a wholesome approach to what could be the sources of the biases, where they're coming from, and that information can help us to do the measurement. You asked the question about the socio-technical. So all of these problems are socio-technical. So there is not just a technical or technology solution for them. We just talk about cognitive science, biases, for example. And the fact that one of the components of the responsible AI is human centricity. So you have the humans there, and that gets to another challenge that we have with building the science for the measurement that a lot of things that we are used to on, for example, measuring length, mass, electricity, those areas that NIST work on coming up with standards for measuring them at the turn of the last century, which were critical for the underlying technologies of at that time. Right now, we have quantitative metrics to measure them, interoperable ways of measuring them. Uh, um, we are at the turn of technology. We are trying to do the very same thing for the technology of our time.
As you mentioned, that some other jurisdictions, the European Union in particular, have now a comprehensive legislation on AI, which we don't have in the United States. Talk a little bit about what the function is of the work that NIST does in that context where there aren't necessarily specialized regulations.
So NIST is a non-regulatory agency. We don't work with regulators. None of the things that we put out is for mandatory use. Everything is for voluntary use. And even the evaluations that we do, while we evaluate for example, accuracy or security or privacy or any of these things, we don't make any judgment on how safe is safe, how private is private, how accurate is accurate, because there is no one size fits all, and it depends on the context of use. What we are trying to do and our work with the policymakers is to provide empirical evidence to help with development of the policies that are clear, and also make sure that the underlying science and technical tool and standard exist to help with the enforcement of of the policy. We just talk about it that the laws can come and say that AI must be safe, what safety means. And we see it, what happened with the EU Act as well, that after its passing, now, since not like a European standardization body, are tasked with coming up with the standards for basically checking the conformity assessment to the requirements in the law. So we are not regulatory. Everything that we put out is for voluntary use, but we give sort of empirical evidence for clear policy making, evidence based policy making, and the technical tools and the measurements and evaluations needed and standards needed for enforcement of that. I use the word standard several times, and it may be helpful if I clear that while standard is our middle name, we are not standard development organizations such as ISO or IEEE. There are really good policies in the US in effect and in existence that the job of the federal government is to help industry develop the standards. So they are in the driver's seat. We are supporting their work because, again, we bring those objective technical contributions in the development of the standards. Back in 2019, we had a task by an executive order to write a plan for federal government engagement in development of AI standards. With this current EL, we have a task to develop a plan for global engagement, promote consensus industry standards. And so we work a lot with the community, both industry and standard development organizations, on promotion and facilitate development of the good standards, but we are not developing standards.
What is your sense about the current state of global cooperation and coordination on AI responsibility issues?
So a lot of conversations has been happening for the past many years that I have been involved, and a lot of really good work is happening. OECD has OECD AI Governance Party is doing a lot of good work on bringing communities together, but also provide a lot of technical clarity for policymaking through a lot of the work that they're doing, a lot of documents that they're putting out. Um, we saw really good progress through the G7 kind of code of conduct that tried to bring more sort of a global interoperability on the sort of voluntary commitment that happened in the US. Bottom line is that global conversations and global interoperability for the AI space is really important. It is for any type of standards, but particularly in this space, the technology is obviously very global and the users are across the globe. So we are thinking about really maximizing the benefits of AI while minimizing its negative consequences, harnessing the power of AI for good. We need more global engagement both at the research side to build the scientific underpinning, on the standard side, so we all are kind of using the same standards, and also on the implementation and operationalization side, so we can all benefit from this technology. So a lot of really good work is happening, and a lot more can be done, I guess.
Absolutely. Well, that's a really great place to wind up. Thank you so much for a really fascinating conversation.
Thanks for having me. Enjoy the conversation.
This has been The Road to Accountable AI. If you like what you're hearing, please give us a good review and check out my Substack for more insights on AI accountability. Thank you for listening.